Guys, can you see my screen?
Yeah, yes.
All right, so let's get started. Basically, in the last session, we extended our, same example. If you recall, we introduced couple of new concepts, right? So, which is the example we are working on. This is the process where we are trying to sync the employees data from the disk to the database, right? So we are reading employees file, and then what we started doing yesterday is we started looking into a case wherein we need to transform in such a way that the grade of an employee decides the salary of the employee, and that grade might increase in numbers. We may have more grades as we grow in number, or else the salary pertaining to a grade might change, right? For such kind of business requirement, we try to do things in two ways. One is using if else, right, which may not be the best way to cater that kind of requirement. Another thing is using cross reference table, right, which is a better thing to do. And we understood how to basically do a lookup from the cross reference table, how to fetch the values and do the mappings. Also, we understand an important part that whenever we have an XML data, right, and if we see any element not populating, it might happen that any transformation which is happening with that particular element may not kick off. So that's why we introduced the dummy map. In this dummy map, we just did one-to-one mapping, right? If you recall, yes, we just did one-to-one mapping to ensure that the grade gets created even though if it is not coming from the source side, right? So we just added a default with a space, so that will produce an empty grade element. So these are the few things we have seen in the last session. Any questions from anyone? No questions? All right, so there is an error handling process, right, which we need to define. So far, we haven't done any logic building over here, but what we understand is if from a parent process, we need to send some data to the child process, right? So what kind of star shape should we have in the child process?
Data pass through.
We should have it as data pass through. Very nice, right? And what are the two important properties we have at the process called shape, which can be configured as and when needed?
Wait for the process to complete or abort if sub-process fails.
Very nice. These are the two properties. You will see exactly same certification questions, right? So you're absolutely correct. These are the two properties we have. And which shape in Boomi is used to produce certain custom defined logs?
Notify.
Notify. Very nice. So we saw talked about this shape also, right? If you recall, notify shape, wherein we can create some custom logs, right? Does notify shape alter your document?
No.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't, right? Which shape can alter your document?
Message.
We have message shape that can alter your document, right? We have map shapes which can alter your document, but this notify shape, set property shape, these do not alter your document, right? So this is about development, and we do know how to do the unit testing, but this is just a unit testing, right? In real time, once you are done with this, you did the whole testing of the process in the build tab. This is called a build tab, and this build tab has a limitation that you can do testing. Important note, we can test at most 100 documents or 100 MB of data in test mode in build tab. So right now we are in test mode, right? I mean, when we do the testing over here, this is called as test mode. You click here, you select the atom, and right now this mode is called as a test mode, right? So when you're in the build tab and you're in the test mode, you can test the processes, which is fine, but there is a limitation that you can test at most either 100 documents or 100 MB of data, whichever is achieved first, right? If you cross this, your execution would fail in the build tab. It will not allow you to do that because build tab has its own limitations. But that does not mean that your process is incorrect, right? But it only means that for such volume of data, we cannot do the testing over here in the build tab. We might need to deploy this process and then test it out. Are you guys following me? So whatever I'm doing over here, this is called as a build tab, right? We are in the build tab, isn't it? If you just exit the full screen, we are in the build tab. Now, when we test it, this is called as a test mode. Now, when we are in the test mode, there's a limitation that at most we can have 100 documents or 100 MB of data, right? So now, another important thing is, which because when we talk about the complete life cycle, right? Build is one part, okay? Build is one aspect of it. Then what is the next aspect? Deploy, right? And then we manage the integrations. So what do we do here is we create the package component. Yeah. What we do is we create the packaged component. So what is the meaning of packaged component? So right now, which is the core process that is kind of beholding all other components or shapes within itself?
Process.
Process is the core component, right? So now what we do is we basically create some deployable archive, right? So many of you might have heard about jar file, var file, .ear file. So we basically package all the different components that are used to achieve the required business functionality. So same thing happens over here in Boomi. You do not get to see whether you are getting behind the scene .jar, .var, but then there is an option create packaged component. So what I'm saying is here, this is a shortcut. So I will say create packaged component. So your packaged component cannot be created for all the different types of components. Okay. I mean, it is possible for some components only. I will tell you for which components can be packaged. So you see what it is saying. Select one or more deployable components from the component explorer to create a package component of each selection. Although you can select multiple components to package at one time, each selected component results in its own individual version. So right now I have selected how many components? There is only one component, right? These all are folders, isn't it? These are all folders, but how many components are here?
One.
Only one. And which is that component?
Synchronized disk.
Process.
Can you see here? The component name is there, component type is there. Now here there is a gear icon which says actions, right? So it has a one important thing, view included components. So when you're trying to package the process, this might have some other components already included. Let's look at the included components. So can you see right now which version of the process are we in? We're in the 127th version, and it is internally referring a lot of other components. So you can see there is a cross reference table, there is a database profile, there is a disk connection, disk operation, map, database connection operation, right? There is another process, there are XML profiles and the corresponding versions and all that stuff. So this all is part of the package which is being created, right? This all is part of the package which is being created. So what we'll do here is we say next, add details. So what do we do over here? We can write some comments, and here is a version, right? So it is up to you. It's better you leave this version as it is because it is automatically going to increment it. See, what is it saying? If you do not supply a name, a version number is automatically generated for each individual package component and increments based on the latest version number. So right now, how many versions have we already created for this? Have we packaged it earlier, or is it the first time we are creating a package?
It is first time.
It is the first time.
It is the first time, right? So if I don't give any version, by default, it should take version number 1. So I will write, like, let's say this is my first package, okay, for employee synchronization process. Okay, there is another option, sharing allow process and APIs to be publicly shared to sub accounts. Right now we'll ignore this. We'll go and hit the button, create package component. So what it is saying, packaged component successfully created. Your package component was successfully created. To deploy your package component, click on the deploy button. So a package has already been created. Now you can go and deploy your component, or you can deploy your packaged components. So one thing you have to understand is the deployment in Boomi is a two-step process. Deployment in Boomi is a two-step process. And what are those two steps?
Create package component.
Yes. First is package. So you have to create packaged components. And then once that is done, deploy the packaged components. So now before I go with the deployment, I would want to see where is a package. So it's not necessary you have to go and deploy right after this. You can just close it for the timing. That's fine. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that anything which you have to do related to deployment, there is a separate tab for that, isn't it? I'll go to the deploy tab, and here, do you see there is something called as packaged components?
Yes.
So when you go to the packaged components, can you see any packaged component with today's date?
Yes.
Yes. Here's a component name, component type, version, the created date, whatever notes we wrote, sharing is not allowed, status is active. And here, then there is a gear icon where you have a deploy option. You have an option to delete package component. You have an option to see package component details. If I click on the package component details, you have to understand for each package, there is a component ID. Yes or no? Then you have included components. Then deployments, which we didn't do. Then process library comes into the picture when you basically publish it for further reuse, which we haven't done so far. So what I'm trying to say is you have to explore all these options, right? Then there is a option called as package component history. I'll go to this. So right now we see only one version, right? Because that is the only thing which we created so far. Then you have compare packaged components. So that is helpful when you want to compare two different versions, right? So when I click on this, so right now it has only one version, right? But if you want to compare two different versions and see what has changed. And another thing is, if let's say you have a package and out of this package, you again want to create a Boomi process. So you can click on the option copy to component explorer. You can select the path. Yes, you can select the path wherever you want to copy. Yes. So now once the package component is there, then what is the next step?
Deploy.
We have to deploy it. And we can very well see the option to deploy it. But before we do that, there has to be some check which we need to make, because for any deployment to happen, first of all, you have to ensure an environment is configured. Okay. For any deployment to happen, the environment must be configured, right? Have we configured any environment so far?
No.
No.
No, right? The next important part is an environment should have a runtime attached to it. So this couple of steps are missing, and that's why I didn't proceed with my deployment. So what I'll do is I'll go to the atom management. Okay, when you go to the atom management, can you see there is an option called as environment, and you see a lot of environments created, right? This I created previously for different batches of mine, but I'll create a new one. Okay, new environment, and the name is, let's say, hash dev. Now, when you create an environment, there is an important thing which you have to understand. There is a concept called as environment classification. Do you recall how many classifications can we have in Boomi?
To
In
production and
production,
test.
development, test.
So there are only two classifications, that is production and test. Okay, this is a very, very important note. There are two environment classifications in Boomi, and those are prod and test. That's all. Now you have to be very, very conscious of the fact that if you're choosing this production classification, how is it going to impact? If you're choosing the text classification, how is it, what's going to be the impact? So right now, generally, I mean, you whenever you're creating, you can create dev environment, you can create QA environment, you can create performance environment, you can create staging environment, you can create n number of environments. But from Boomi side, there are only two classifications. Those are production and test. Generally, for any non-prod environment, the environment classification has to be test. But if you choose production, Boomi won't stop you. Boomi won't stop you. Boomi doesn't care what is written over here. Okay, for Boomi, it is nothing more than a name. Okay, what matters is the classification, and based on the classification you choose, there are going to be some repercussions which we will talk about. So right now, we'll choose the environment classification as test for, and the name of the environment is dev, and I'll hit save. Do we see our environment here on the top? Yes.
Yes.
For this environment, there is an environment ID, right? There is a classification called as test. There are some roles which you can configure with access. Right now, any role with environment manager privilege has access by default. Then there are some attachments. There is something called as environment extension. There is something called as delete environment. That's fine. So now there is an environment, and to this environment, you have to attach a runtime. Which is the runtime that we have configured so far?
Atom.
Atom, right? Atom is one runtime which we have configured so far. So if you go here under attachments, you see an option to attach one atom. So it is saying processing container attachment. So environment is a container to which we do a deployment, and it can have n number of runtimes. So right now, if you see, there is a runtime. That runtime name is April batch dev atom. There is an atom ID and all that stuff. But this atom is now attached to an environment, and the name of the environment is dev. Quick question here. There can be multiple interview questions. Can an atom be attached to multiple environments at the same time?
No.
So the question is, I'll repeat, there is an atom which is attached to one environment, and the name of the environment is dev. Can I attach the same atom to, let's say, this one? If you go here, do you see anything under attachments now? No, right? So that means an atom can be attached to an environment at a time. You cannot attach the atom to multiple environments at the same time. But if, let's say, I go to this environment and I detach it, it's so simple to detach and attach. Now let's say I detach it. Now, can the same atom be attached to a different environment? Answer is yes. At the same time, we cannot attach a same atom to two different environments. But if there was an atom which was attached to dev environment, and later on I want to attach it to a different environment, that can be done, right? Next question. Can we have two different atoms attached to the same environment? or can we have two different atoms attached to the same runtime? Okay, so now we can see one. Okay, for checking about the second one, we should have at least two runtimes, right? Right now, how many do we have? We have only one. So I'll go to new, I'll go to atom. So last time, which atom did we configure? The one which is local. Now there is something called in the cloud. And where do we configure this? So there is atom cloud. Okay, just a note, just a quick note over here. Atom cloud is cluster of molecules. Okay, how many types of atom cloud do we have? Two types: public atom cloud, private atom cloud. If you check my notes of first or second day, you would see these things. Okay, public atom cloud, private atom cloud. Now this is the one which we are talking about right now, is a public atom cloud. This public atom cloud is maintained and managed by Boomi. Yes. So now we go here, we are saying we want to configure an atom in the cloud. And what is the cloud name? So you have different, so they have created different ones. Okay, so there is ANZ, Singapore. It's up to you. You can choose. Let me choose ANZ, and I will say this one as test atom cloud. Okay, there is an atom cloud, and there you are setting up a new runtime, right? So can you see a new runtime over here? There is a symbol, cloud kind of symbol, and with other one there was a round symbol, right? So that indicates this one is local and this one is the one in the cloud, right? If you go here, here the type is atom. Here the type is cloud, right? So this is, so it is saying the properties for the atom, molecule, or atom cloud. So now this is the atom cloud. Yes. And the name we have given is test atom cloud. You could give whatever name you want. So this is the environment. Okay, so sorry. Do you see an option to attach this test atom cloud over here?
No.
No, right? Now what has happened is, if you go to this test atom cloud, what is the classification?
Production.
The classification is production. And what is the classification of your environment?
Test.
Test. So is there a mismatch?
No.
There is a mismatch, right? Dev environment is of which classification?
Test.
Test classification. And this atom cloud which you configured is of which classification? Production. That's why in this environment you don't see an option to attach the new atom which we have configured. So now let's say so I have given it the wrong name, right? It is a misleading name, isn't it? The classification is production, but the name has been given as test atom cloud. So it is kind of a misleading name. So what I'll do is I'll go here. Is there an option to change name? Yes. I'll go here and I'll say. Now the name got changed. Yes. I'll go to new, again atom in the cloud. So again I get an option. Which one? This one. This time I will select test cloud. Yes. And I'll name this as test atom cloud. Because your test cloud will have which classification? Test classification, right? Do you see a new atom? Type is cloud. And what is the classification this time? Test classification, right? And now when you come to the environment, do you see an option to attach the new atom cloud?
Yes.
Yes. Why do you see an option now? Because your dev environment was of test classification. The new atom which you have configured is also of which classification? Test classification, and you can very well attach n number of atoms to the same environment. Are we able to attach?
Yes.
Yes. So the answer for this question is, can we have two different atoms attached to the same environment?
Yes.
Yes. But the classification of environment and runtime needs to match. Does that make sense? Okay, can an atom be attached to multiple environments at the same time? No. All right. Any questions, guys, so far from anyone? Okay, these all are important things to know. Okay, so we attach.
Amit,
Mhm.
can you explain that second one? I'm a little bit confused about that. Second
So,
question.
okay, so the second question was, can we have two different atoms attached to the same runtime? To the same, not same runtime, to the same environment. Okay, so what does this mean is, there is an environment dev. Okay, so now how many runtimes are attached to it? One,
Two.
two, right? The question was, can we attach two? Answer is yes, we can attach two, but the only thing which you have to take care of is you have to see the environment classification, which is test over here, and you have to check the classification of your runtimes, right? What is the classification of this runtime? Test, right? Where can you find that?
Host.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this one, which is the classification? For your on-prem ones, you will not have any classifications. You can attach them to anywhere.
Okay.
Okay, that classification will be there only for the ones which comes from Boomi. So this test atom cloud, or this atom, is not something which we have configured, or I mean, this is not, of course we have configured, but this is owned and managed by Boomi. Okay, but why can't I attach this atom cloud to dev?
Because of different environment classification.
Absolutely correct. So now let's say I go here, I create an environment hash prod. I go here. Do I get an option to select atom cloud? Yes. Why? Because the environment classification for the environment and the runtime is matching, isn't it?
Mm,
Yes. How do we detach it? So I go to dev. I realize that I don't need both of them. I need only one. I will uncheck this. I'll say okay. This will get detached. Yes. Now to your dev, you have a local atom. For your prod, you have an atom cloud, and there is one unattached atom, which is fine. Let it be there.
My question here is that on-premise item can be attached to any environment irrespective of the environment classification.
Yes, we can. So let's check it out. So to dev, we have April batch, this dev atom attached. Let's detach it. Okay, now I come back to prod. Am I able to attach this? So this dev atom was just the name. Okay, it does not have any such classifications. So are you able to attach it? Yes, we can, right? And now you can detach this from here, and you can bring back over here. Any other questions from anyone?
One more question about the Atom Cloud. So, private or Atom Cloud is hosted and managed by the enterprise. Is it true? About private Atom Cloud.
Come again.
Uh, can you go to the notes? Yeah. You didn't mention about that private Atom Cloud. It is maintained and managed by. Is it maintained and managed by the enterprise itself?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So only very big customers will do that.
Okay.
Okay, big customers or sometimes partners. So let's say TCS is Boomi partner. Okay, and TCS internally is providing services to many companies, right? So they can create a private Atom Cloud either for a single customer, or they can create a private Atom Cloud which can be shared among multiple customers. Or let's say sometimes you might have seen some companies, right? So so they will have different business units, right? So only big customers who have multiple business units or multiple business areas will typically do that.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so we are good so far. Now we have an environment, we have an atom attached to it. So now one thing you could understand which gets impacted with the classification is that there has to be a match between the classification of the environment and the classification of your runtime. Your local atoms will not have any such classification. Another important thing is about licensing. Okay, so now whenever you purchase the licenses, so which is the biggest factor that kind of impacts the licensing cost in Boomi?
Number of connection we use.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, the number of connections we consume, right? So whenever you will go to Boomi, they'll give you some questionnaire that will have 8 to 10 different questions, but the biggest or the important factor, the most important factor which is going to basically drive the cost for your licensing is the number of connections you want to consume, right? So now let's say you had to develop this process which we did so far. How many connections would you ask them for?
Can you repeat the question?
We developed one process just some time back, right? If this is the only business requirement we have and we go to the Boomi team, and if they ask us how many connections do you need, what should be our answer?
I think 3. One is disk connection we took and the database connection. Only 2.
Okay, one is disk, another is database. Any other answers from anyone?
Four, two for test and two for fraud.
Okay, so if you think there are two environments, one is test and another is prod, your answer is 2 for test, 2 for prod, which is also correct. So let's say if you have two environments, two lower environments and one prod environment, then how many connections? So you will ask for 4 connections which are for non-prod and 2 connections for prod. Is that correct? So when they will give you the connections also have a classification. Okay. When Boomi assigns the connection, it has also got the environment classification attached to it. Okay, when Boomi assigns a connection, it has also got the environment classification attached to it. What does that mean? All right, so here you go to the settings. Then there is something called as account information and setup. So on the left pane, do you see something called as licensing? Right. So the licensing information shows your account, purchase connections, cloud usage, and API usage counts. Right. So now so these are definitely three different factors, right, which will help in deriving your licensing cost. So first, let's talk about connection. So can you see some connections here? And there are some classification connector class: small business, standard, enterprise, trading partner. So I have 3 standard and 3 trading partner. Yes or no? Can you see 3 standard, 3 trading partner? How many deployed? 0. How many of them are available? 3, right? So this is for prod classification. If you see beside this, there is a drop down. If you go to this drop down, can you see there is something in bracket test also? Guys, can you see it over here? So this is the place where you can see the number of licenses you have purchased for the production category, the number of licenses you have purchased for the test category, how many of them are available, how many of them are deployed, right? So now if you're creating by mistake, if you're creating an environment, let's say dev, but if you had chosen the classification as production, now the biggest problem which is going to happen is that you will end up exhausting the connections from which category?
Production.
From production category, because if the environment has been classified as production, then it will start consuming your connection licenses from production category. If you have classified your environment as test, then it will consume your connections from test category. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. If you see here, here you have another couple of tables. One is connectors deployed in class standard, and there are some deployments. So once we do our first deployment, you will see some data getting populated over here, which will make things more clear for you. So now what we'll do is we'll go back. I'll just zoom in. Okay, we'll go back to the package components. Okay, now once we package the component, are we good for deployment now? Do we have an environment in place? Do we have a runtime attached to it? Answer is yes, we do have. We'll go here and we'll say deploy. So which is the environment I need to choose? There are a lot of environments which comes in, but which is the one I need to choose? Hash dev. Yeah. So I'll say this is my, you can give some relevant notes. Okay, generally when you're working for any customer, right? And if the customer is using any ticketing system, maybe they are using Jira or Salesforce or ServiceNow, whatever, right? So it's better you write that ticket number that in this particular build, which is the ticket number that is going, so that later on you know that which version had which fix, right? This is my first deployment for employee synchronization process. Okay, so you go here, just you can just minimize the zoom if you want, or else you can just go with 100% zoom. Just make sure you go here, you say next select version. Okay, so now we are ready for the deployment of a packaged component with a version 1.0. Yes. And go at the bottom. What it is saying, next review. So this is the package. This is the package which is being deployed. You can review the stuff and you can say deploy. So now here there's an important message which is coming. That message went away, but that message was recalculating dependencies and auditing. Something like auditing deployments, maybe it was like that. So what does it do internally is, before any deployment, it will go and check the number of connection licenses you have. And if you have sufficient number of connection licenses, then only your deployment will go ahead. So let's say if I create a process right now which has 4 connections, will the deployment go ahead? No,
No.
right? Because how many connection licenses do I have under my bucket?
3.
Only 3, right? So the deployment may not go ahead because I only have 3 connection licenses, so I cannot exceed those. But at the same time, in the build tab, you can use a number of connections. It will not stop you from doing that. Let's say I purchase 3 connections, but in the build tab, I want to develop something which, let's say, has 10 connections also. That is fine. You can always do that. This number of connection licenses comes into play at the time of deployment. Okay. So we'll go to the settings. We'll go to the account information and setup. We'll go to the licensing. Now this is strange. Okay, no, it's not. So if you see under standard, how many are deployed? 2, right? How many of these are available? 1. If you scroll down further, do you see which all 2 connections you are using? Yes or no? Type is your type, name, internal ID. Which ID is this one?
Component ID.
I think it has to be a component ID. You're correct. Right. So you can see all the details where, what is the atom name, which process these are being used in, what is the connector name, and what is the connector type. All right. So now what we'll do is we'll go under atom management. So since you have started new, right, some people might feel there are a lot of navigations, right? Sometime I'm in this tab, that tab. I mean, initially, sometimes it is a little confusing. Even when I started learning it, it was same for me. But as and when, as I mean, you practice, maybe in a week's time, you will become quite habituated to all these different tabs, and you should find it really easy to navigate from one tab to another. So I go here, I go to, this is the environment, and to this environment, this is the runtime, right? And this runtime, if you select over here, there is something called as atom information. There is something called as startup properties. There is something called as log files. There is something called as deployed processes. Can you see a deployed process here right now under this atom, which is tied to a dev environment? Yes.
Yes.
So you see an process which is deployed to an atom, and that atom is tied to dev environment. So now from here, you see some options. You see an option to execute process. You see something you can edit schedules. You see something like edit process properties, which is fine. Right now your process is successfully deployed, right? But you haven't tested it out. So you haven't tested it out, right? So what I'll do is I'll quickly go here. I delete all the stuff. And I write select star from. So there are no rows. There's no data as such, right? So now so there are multiple ways you can trigger it. So now I'll write, let's say execute process. So it is saying process execution message has been sent, right? But right now you cannot see these process executions in the build tab, right? Build tab was supposed to be used during the development, right? Now, how do you see that whatever execution you have just triggered, has it been successful or what happened to it, right? So then under the manage, right? So you have to understand, you started with the build of the integration, then you did the deployment. And once the deployment is done, it is all about managing that integration, right? So we came to the manage, we configured the environment, we configured the atom, we attached the atom to the environment. We saw that the deployment is going through, we triggered our process. Now under the manage, there are a lot of options, okay? There is process reporting, there is atom management, there is Boomi Assure, there is process library, and there is trading partner management. So we will go to the first option called as process reporting. So when you go to the process reporting, here by default, you see the executions which has happened in last 1 hour. Do you see any execution? Just couple of minutes back,
Yes.
here an execution has happened. What kind of execution is this? Manual execution. Did we manually trigger it?
Yes.
Do you see this is our process name? Here there are some actions. You can see the deployment components. You can see the process state. You can see extended information. So when I'll say view process, so it will take us back to the process which is deployed, right? Okay, I will not open. So this is the process. It will take us back to the process which is deployed. If I will say deployment components, it will show me all the components which were part of the deployment. If I'll click on view process state, this is very important. This is asked in the interviews also. If you have to observe at shape level what has happened, I mean, you cannot see shape level logs once the deployment is done. Let me repeat, you cannot see shape level logs once the deployment is done. You can see the shape level logs only in the build tab. Note, we can't see shape level logs, but this process state will give you a very detailed information that how much time was taken by the star shape, then the control came to the try catch, then you can started with the try branch, control came to the notify shape. There was a connector. Which connector is this one? Disconnector, right? Then you had a document properties, then there was a map shape. Which map shape is this one?
Dummy map.
Very nice. It is dummy one. Then you have a data process shape. Then there is a decision branch. In decision, you have true or false. You go to true. Again, within true, there is a branch one or branch two. You can see what happened in the branch one. Then you can see branch two. Then you can see false. So this way you can track your complete flow. And sometimes, when you have to see like your customer comes to you and say your process is taking too long for the execution, right? Then you can identify which component took the most of the time, right? Whether it is a map shape or any connector component, and accordingly you can try to tune things, right? So now what we'll do is,
So with here, one question. If when process error occurs at the time of deployment, so how we can figure out what is that error?
it will show you at the time of deployment. If something goes wrong, it will give you a pop-up.
Okay.
You will rarely see those kind of errors. Okay. I mean, once the package is successful, you will rarely see deployment errors.
Okay.
Then,
But
Mhm.
okay, but maybe if like if I'm integrating a database and database is shut down and we have deployed the process, we didn't know about that. So error might occur at that time.
That is not deployment error, na? That is a runtime error. Deployment error means when the see, maybe you are, so deployment error means when you are deploying the process, you're right. Now, let's say the password might change. For all those things, you can see the error over here. So right now you see this as green color, right? that might be a red color, that might be signified with red color, or else you are, so it's not necessary that anything which is green is always successful. First of all, green means your process successfully completed. Even if you have an error handling, it will be green. So in that case, if something gets error out, your error handling should be smart enough to notify you about those errors.
And from where will get that error?
You will see those here only.
Okay.
There is a section called as error message, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, if you have not done the error handling, it will turn red and it will populate the error in the error message. It will show you over here also. You go, there is a hyperlink. If you will go here, here also it will show you that error message if something goes wrong. But what I'm trying to say is, if you have done the error handling, right, then your error handling should be smart enough to notify you about error. So,
Okay.
so it might, whenever error happens, it might generate an alert for you, and that alert should help you to basically know what went wrong and what is that execution ID which went wrong. Then using that execution ID, you can come over here and you can filter. So for example, if you go here, there is a filter on execution ID. So if in email you get the execution ID, you can write that execution ID over here and you can go to the relevant execution which failed and you can just debug that. How can you debug? One way is go to the process state and you can see where things went wrong, right? Or else you can go to this logs also. These are process level logs which you could see in the build tab also. Right? So there is one in document, out document. So that depends on the operation you are doing. Okay. So in means inbound and out means outbound, right? So when you're performing an inbound operation, one document came in, and when you're performing an outbound operation, probably the 4 different documents went out of your process, isn't it? So what is an inbound operation? We were reading a file, right? That was a single document. And then that single document was split into 4 different documents, and then which resulted into 4 documents being sent at the outbound. When it says outbound, it can be for disk connector, it can be for database connector, anything. And here you have the time. If you just want to see more details, you go to this time stamp. So here you can see at the connector level also what happened. Can you see there's a connector read employees data success, and it is saying which is the directory from where the file is being read, the file name, and we can see the document. Yes, we can see the document. If you want to see what went to the database, you can see this all went to the database. If you want to see what went to the disk connector, which is writing the employees data, so you can see the file name, success file name, and the error file name, and you can see the files also here. Yeah. So you can see quite a lot of details over here, right, from the process reporting tab. And this tab can also be used, or this process reporting dashboard can also be used to execute process. Can you see there is an option called as execute process? I can select the atom. I can select the process. Why does it show us only one process? Because there is only one process deployed to this atom, isn't it? I say execute. There is a button called as auto refresh, which is off by default. You can turn it on, off, on. I mean, you can just toggle it a couple of times. You can see 2 executions, right? Now, all these are manual executions. In real time, would we want to do all this manually, or we would want to schedule it?
Schedule it.
Right? We would want to schedule it, right? So what we'll do is we'll go to the atom management back. We'll go to the deployed processes. And here there is an option called as edit schedules. Important note, the time scheduled will run based on the which time zone?
IST.
No.
Where our atom is installed.
Yes, where atom is installed. It will be based on the time zone of the machine where your atom is installed. It is clearly mentioning it will run based on the atom's time zone, which in my case is IST because I'm in Indian IST time zone. For me, it is IST. That's why it is showing IST. If you'll try something for you, if you're in PST, it will show you PST. Yeah. Here you can add the execution. So one important note is very, very important note. You cannot schedule any Boomi process for less than a minute. You cannot schedule any Boomi process for less than a minute. Yeah. So I'm saying minute. Let's say I want to schedule it every 5 minutes. Okay. I'm saying minutes. Starting time is 00 to 11:59. And here I will write 5 and I can select all the days. So it is saying 12 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. every 5 minutes every day. Right? You can add multiple schedules also if you want. You can delete them. You can add some retry logic also. I'll talk about what is the meaning of this retry. You add this. So let's say instead of 5 minutes, for now I'll make it 1 minute. I'll hit OK. Okay. So now you go here, you have edit schedules. Okay. Maybe I don't know whether, okay, that got saved. Let me see it again. Edit schedules. Okay. I can see it now. Yeah. I can see the schedule. If you feel, okay, whatever scheduler you configured should stop. Okay, you found some issue and your business is asking do not run the schedulers anymore. So one thing is people go ahead and can undeploy the process, which is really not required. You can come here and you say stop schedules. Can you see this turns red? You are stopping the schedule. You have an option to resume it. If you resume it, you go to the process reporting. Can you see an execution has automatically kicked off? And this time it is saying scheduled execution. The previous one was a manual execution. So there is a difference in symbol, right? And this will keep on happening. I mean, if you give it some time, one more will kick off. So I hope this gives you a little bit idea about how the deployment is done. I will show you multiple times, but wanted to give you a high level idea about how the deployment is done. How do we configure the environments? How do we check the number of connection licenses? How do we schedule the process? How do we stop the schedule? Right? What is the process reporting tab? What all we can see in this? This is not the end of it. This is just the beginning of, all this process. We'll continue looking at it. I know it is not easy to absorb all these things in single go, but when we do it 3-4 times, I think you will start remembering it. All right, so guys, we'll just take a pause over here. And
Yeah, one question, Sumit.
mhm.
Connections are referring the